Hi everybody, I'm Jen Dauphinais. Welcome to the Fleetwood Mac panel. I'm going to call my panelists up in a moment. The day was September 23rd, 1975, and if we could jump to the band photo, just so you could get a sense of what it looked like. Here we are, a year and 6 days before I was born. Right? And in July of '75, Fleetwood Mac had just released their second eponymous album, their 10th album overall, which featured new members Lindsay, Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. Relocating from England to California 1 year prior, the lineup featuring Bob Welch had drawn to a close, and Buckingham Nicks entered the picture with Fleetwood Mac 1975 being recorded just in 3 months. Next slide. Here's where the Mac enters the scene in Connecticut. Here in Connecticut, a Thursday night radio concert series had been gaining a regular audience under the auspices of WPLR's then manager, Dick Kalt, who's with us today. The PLR concert series was hosted by Wallingford's very own Trod Nossel Studios, one of the first in the region to bring public audiences into the studio for live music performances. Tickets for the series could be purchased at local music stores, Jim's Army Navy, and what the kids in the 70s used to call the local waterbed store. This is where Fleetwood Mac enters as part of that series at Trod Nossel, preparing for their upcoming fall tour. So I'd like to bring up my guests for today, my panelists. We're going to take a seat over here. Next slide, please. Dick Kalt, former WPLR manager and founder of the series. Eddie Wazoo, WPLR's personality from the 1970s. Bruce Manke, also WPLR personality from the 70s. And we do have some audio from Rich Robinson, who will be sharing with us from Trod Nossel Studios.
Like this. It's all yours. Wait, before we start, I have to take my clothes off.
You knew that would happen.
No.
It is PG version of Fleetwood Mac, by the way. Hey.
Not using quad. It's the best I can do.
So we'll start with the next slide with some photos from that day, and I'm going to pass this to Dick as soon as he puts his clothes on, and ask you a little bit about who played the series itself, how it came to pass, and a little bit about maybe Foghat or Steppenwolf and other people that played that series.
Well, the series, Trod Nossel, was a promotion idea. At the time, we were growing quickly as a radio station, but one of the things that we really and truly wanted to do was to be constantly changing in a way that we would draw in listeners and keep them, because they never really knew what was coming next. They just knew it was going to be good. And these guys were a big part of that. They were on the air, they were making it happen all the time. And so I was talking with the owner of the station, Bob Herpy, and I said to him, you know, what we ought to do, we have a really good relationship with the record companies, and maybe we can work out something where they will make their groups available if we could record them in a studio and create like a private concert, something that other radio stations didn't have. And he said, go with it. Do whatever you think you can do. And this was one of the things, this is one of the fundamentals about PLR, was trust. We each trusted each other. And so when we had a good idea, we could run with it. So I went and I met with, this is what you want me to talk about, right?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. I went and I met with Tom Cavalier, Doc Cavalier, who's a dentist by trade. And he owned a recording studio in Wallingford. It was originally called Synchron, and they manufactured microphones, which actually were very popular. But he would bring in local groups and record them. And I got together with him, and I said, Doc, I think we can bring in some real talent in here. And what I'd like to do is have them come in, feel like they're in a recording session, produce or perform whatever they like to do. I'll work with your board engineer, who happened to be Rich Robinson. We'll hear from him a little bit later. And I want to invite our listeners in. We'll give away tickets on the air, and they're going to come in and they're going to sit on the floor right in front of the group, like 10 feet away. And they're going to look at the chemistry, and they're going to be part of the chemistry. And they're going to watch how they prepare when they do a song. Watch what happens when they don't like what they're doing. Watch what happens when they like what they're doing. So he sat back and he said, "Are you crazy? How soon can we start?" So we put together a deal. It's a non-commercial deal. And I talked with a number of the record promo people that we were very close to, Dave Demers, Pat Rustasy, I think, some of the others. And they delivered groups that were actually unbelievable. We did, I think, probably 23 or 24 of these sessions. And I can't remember them all. I'm almost done. I can't remember them all.
It's an awesome list. I should have put it on the slides.
I brought the list because, my age, I'm happy to know I'm here. So, besides Fleetwood, we had Steppenwolf, we had Chick Corea Return to Forever, Roger McGuinn, Taj Mahal, 38 Special, Jonathan Edwards, Orleans, Tom Rush, Aztec Two-Step, Raspberries with Eric Carmen. I got a story about that. Larry Coryell, Southside Johnny, Foghat, one of my favorites. Ellen McElwain, NRBQ, Duke and the Drivers, Starcastle, the Beau Brummels. And there's some that I still couldn't even remember to put on the list. It was a fantastic series because we let the performers do what they wanted to do and also get value out of being in the studio at the same time. And the listeners were getting an experience that nobody else could get because they were close in, they could be part of the experience, and they could learn what really happens in a recording session. So it ran for, a couple of years, right? And there were times where we had trouble in terms of timing with sound checks, and we were running late. I'd have to go out and buy cases of beer in order for people to, all kinds of interesting stories. But we'll tell you a most interesting story today. But that's how the Trod Nossel series began, and it was extremely successful, and a lot of the cuts are still being heard. I'll leave it at that.
And I think I did mention that this day that we're going to deep dive into is probably one of the more popular Mac bootlegs out there now. If you go online and Google Trod Nossel September 23rd, 1975, there's so many different versions, and it's really fun to read people's comments as well, like some people who were there or who wished they were there or have just commentary on what was happening with the band, which is what we're about to get into. And Dick, you and I have had a chance to talk a few times. It was actually hard to curate this into enough time for this session because we could talk about this one day for a very long time. There's just an immense amount of footage, archive material, and stories. The next slide with Stevie, and these are the ones on the car, prompt me to ask you about the car and also about dinner and the lead up. That morning, you told me like it was just luck how things fell together, and going out to dinner and sort of folks noticing that you were with them in public and what that felt like.
Well, it was when I worked out the deal for Fleetwood to come in. I was talking to the record company and the record promo guy, and he said, "You're going to get a call from Finn Costello." Finn is their official photographer. Now, at the time, Mick was managing the group. And of course, if you're familiar at all, and I'm sure you are, it had already gone through a few iterations up until 1975. And Mick was managing the group, although the real manager was Christine McVie at that time. She kind of controlled things, and wonderful woman. Anyway, so Finn called me up and he said, "Okay, we're going to meet at the studio." I said, "Yeah, let's meet around 2:30 or 3. We'll do some sound checking. We'll have a break. Then we'll have the crowd come in. We'll do yada, yada, yada." Went over the whole thing. He said, "Well, here, I'd like to do me a favor. We want to shoot an album cover for our next album, and I'd like to get a vintage car. Something that they can pose on, something from the 20s, something from the 30s, whatever." I said, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." And I thought, oh boy, the yellow Rolls Royce lives in New Haven. That would be very cool. Except, unfortunately, the yellow Rolls Royce was on tour. It was always on tour. So for about a week or so, I'm calling around and I'm trying to find a car, and I can't find anything. So the day of the recording session arrives, and I'm driving to Trod. I'm driving to Wallingford, and I'm on the Parkway, and I'm thinking, oh, shit, what am I gonna? I don't have a car. I don't want to start this way. And I'm just driving. I remember I was on the New Haven side of the tunnel. What pulls up literally next to me? I mean, this is what you call fate. So, like a 1932 Rolls-Royce convertible. And I'm thinking, are you playing with me? And so I signaled to the guy, and I kind of see if I could get him to pull over, which is not an easy thing to do on the Merritt Parkway. So he pulls over, and I pull over, and I figure I got about 30 seconds to do this before the cops come and get us. And I explained to him that I needed to use his car. I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm on my way to a rally in New Jersey. I said, when is it? He says, tomorrow. I said, I need to borrow your car. I'm willing to pay you $100. I need it for maybe an hour or two. And he said, well, I got the time. I could probably do that. He says, what for? I said, well, we're doing a recording session with Fleetwood Mac, and they're going to be doing some shooting, and they want to use the car as a prop. He says, well, you don't have to give me $100. Where do I have to go? And, I mean, literally, within 10 minutes of arriving at the studio to start everything is when I got the car. Now, I had called a friend of mine, Tony Neri, who had a bunch of friends who were drag racers, and they wanted to come to the session as well. And I said, well, you know, we'll see you then. So when we got there, I noticed that Tony had brought his red Chevy drag racing car, and it was parked out in front of the studio. So it wasn't really a predetermined idea for Stevie at that time. But like the fate of having the car pulling up next to me on the Parkway, so the drag racer became a prop as well. So we did a whole photo shoot before we began even the sound check. And that's where we got the shot with Stevie on the hood and with the group with the Rolls Royce. But I have to tell you, I still can't explain how it could have happened that way, except it was meant to be. So it was really great.
And a little bit about dinner, too, because that was an interesting story that you shared.
Well, we sound checked, I'd say for a good hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Were you guys there during the sound check? No. So Rich and I were in the studio, and they were doing the sound checking, and Mick was having trouble with the drums, and he wasn't sure what he, John McVie never says anything. He plays his guitar. He's steady as a rock. That's it. And you have Stevie and Lindsay who are there, but they're new. And they're still trying to find their way, and they're trying to figure out their relationship. But Stevie and Christine were already bonding as the two women in the group. So they're sound checking. And now it's about 5 o'clock, and we're going to have the crowd come in around 7 so we could do the actual session. And then Rich and I would do the post-production, and then we would run it on the air that Sunday night. So I said to Christine, I said, how close are you to being done? And she said, yeah, we're just about finished. I said, fine, let's go out to dinner. She said, great, that would be wonderful. And so I said to her, now remember, you've just done a sound check in an empty room. Just know that. She says, oh, I know that. So we jump in 2 cars and drive over to the Yankee Silversmith in Wallingford, because I chose the Yankee Silversmith because I figured nobody would know who they were. I was incorrect. So we went and we get a booth, and we really have a lovely dinner. But what I noticed that was interesting was that the conversation was still kind of siloed a little bit between them. It was very clear to me that there was a lot of uncertainty about how people felt about working with each other. And it was very clear even then, even though it came out much more later, that Lindsay, who is a tremendous musician, producer, writer in his own right, really wasn't sure about his fit in the group. But the whole reason he was in the group is because Stevie said, us two or no two. And that's how he was in the group. But he wanted to figure out a way, you know, to become more of a factor. So we were having very, very light conversation, and people were coming up to the table, and we were talking and everything. But there wasn't the warmth that I would have hoped for, but what I got was pretty much what I thought was going to be. But I want to say this. As far as the session goes, they were professionals. They got into the studio and they did what they wanted to do, and they did what they had to do. Whether they fought or not, it was not a big issue when we did the session. And then we got back, and I'll finish up by just saying, we got back and everybody got in place, and everybody came into the studio and sat on the floor, and we got roll tape, rolling on 2-inch tape, 16-track, ready to go, rolling tape. They get maybe one measure into the first song, and she says, stop. It doesn't sound right. We're going to have to sound check again. And I kind of looked at her through the window, and I said, you know, you sound check in an empty room, and then you come back to a full room, and it's not a stadium. It ain't going to sound the same. And she acknowledged. So I won, and I feel good about it. But it was a great session, and it was a great session, and we did it on a full stomach.
Dick,
yeah.
Do you remember if they'd played out anywhere before? Was this their first time playing in public, or did they do it?
Well, they had released the album. They were
3 months earlier.
Yeah.
July.
So
it was in July or something
already.
like that. I don't know that they had done any public appearance before that, because they were really trying to get to know each other. It was a huge change for the act, because they were going from basically British jazz and jazz and blues to like California.
Right.
That's what they brought into the group between Stevie and Lindsay, was the California sound, which really brought them home.
So they had
I don't
recorded
think
the
so.
album in only 3 months. It was released in July, and then 3 months later they were playing for your series, which we may need a fact check, was the first or one of the first times, and it was considered a tour rehearsal from what I understand. So, which is a great segue
Which
to
is why I wanted
the
them
set
to
list, if you want to go forward. The set list, and hearing from the two of you about the anticipation of knowing they were going to play, Bruce and Eddie, and what kind of your anticipation and like excitement and getting in the room and the audience settling in felt like, and any stories you have from that. And in the back, we have the set list from that day in the lineup as well. So if you'd like to share with us what that was like.
Well, I was fairly new at WPLR when Fleetwood Mac came in. I had joined the station in late July of '75 as a part-timer, and my first show was Larry Coryell, who was a Westport resident. And,
and he was great.
He was excellent.
I have that tape.
I do too. But, Fleetwood Mac was, and Dick, you could probably fill in on this, everybody was extremely excited about it, but probably at the time you signed them, the record wasn't out. Is that correct?
I think we had made the agreement for them right about the time when the record was being released.
And they, but they, I don't know that anyone anticipated that they were so huge at the time you signed them, right?
Well, that album was their big jump.
That was
and then
when
the next album was even bigger.
Yeah. But I mean, the excitement in the room was palpable.
Totally.
Personally, I tried to give them space. I didn't want to, get up into anything, because I know performers, when they're first going on, they're nervous, and everybody gets stage fright. It's a good thing, but it also means leave the performers alone. They're in their own heads. So that's what I did.
There was a lot of pressure on the band, too. And I think it was more self-imposed because of all the different iterations that they'd been through before up until this point. I think when this White Album came out, and there was the new lineup with Lindsay and Stevie, now the band knew that they had some real potential to break out and be much bigger than they ever had been. Not to say that they didn't have great songs before. All of the time that Bob Welch was with the band, you know, they had Sentimental Lady and all of the great songs that were on Mystery to Me. These were great pieces of music, but the band still wasn't gargantuan, and this was their chance. They knew it. The audience loved them. But again, I think it was kind of a self-imposed pressure on the band themselves that they had to, you know, make every shot at playing for a big audience, make it something really, really good. And even they knew that this radio concert was going to reach a huge audience, probably bigger than any arena that they'd ever played in. So, you know, there were all those real human pressures on them. But, gee, it was a good show.
Yeah, it was. I think also that, you know, Fleetwood Mac, it's Mick Fleetwood and John McVie were the core of Fleetwood Mac, and they're a rhythm section, drums and bass. And the whole sound, the whole presentation of the band changed radically from lead guitarist and vocalist and songwriter to group. And what was it, 9 iterations?
This is the 9th lineup.
Yeah, this was the 9th lineup. And each time it was a different band. So Fleetwood Mac prior to this lineup was, you know, like Bruce said, they had a couple of hits, but they were more of a niche band. A lot of college kids. We all came out of college radio, and that's where Fleetwood Mac, the old stuff, really shined, was college radio. I don't think they knew what they were suddenly getting into. They were everywhere, and everybody knew who they were. And I think that was the first time that that they experienced that, and it, you know, it could be a little scary.
Well, in the United States, this was actually right about the time when they kind of like changed from club to stadium performing.
Yep.
Because they became a very, very popular to a very, very huge group in a very short period of time because they changed the sound. What I was hoping for, and I think we got to a degree, is I wanted to see them experiment and kind of fine-tune. I wanted them to use the session as a way to kind of like look at what they're doing, hear what they're doing, knowing they were going on tour, and kind of do the kinds of things you would never see from a group if they were just performing on stage. And we got some of that.
Yeah. We're going to play some audio in a moment, and before we play that audio, we're going to go to the next slide, and it should be Rich Robinson's audio about his anticipation and before what he observed before the session.
When I heard they were coming, I already knew a little bit about them, but I didn't realize how really big they were. They were touring in support of that record with Stevie Nicks twirling around, dancing around in a circle or something. Yeah, so they showed up, and they arrived in the morning, I think, and I talked to their roadies. I talked to that guy, John Courage, and I'm pretty sure it was John Courage who walked in the back door where the load-in was and said, "Hey, man, where's the drugs? Where's the groupie?" That kind of set the pace for the whole thing.
So he was serious?
He was serious, yeah. So I'm in the control room doing sound check, and Stevie Nicks walks into the control room with one of those big black top hats. One thing she said was, can you set me up a keyboard somewhere so I can play so I don't get bored during sound check? So I brought her into my office, and I set up the Hohner clavinet on top of a Marshall cabinet and plugged it into a guitar amp. And she's stayed in my office and just, fooled around on the clavinet for a while, probably an hour or two. I didn't hear much of it because I was in the control room. Yeah, well, Lindsay Buckingham's amp blew up, and we had to stop and get that fixed. Yeah, Mick Fleetwood came into the control room during sound check, listened to his drums, and said, "Me drums sound too pokey." And what he meant was that they had too much transient on them and not enough decay. So I recognized why that was, and I said, okay, fine, I'll fix it for you. I moved all the microphones around. I replugged practically everything. And he liked it after that.
Maybe Stevie was writing Sisters of the Moon for her solo album. Well, I don't know. You never know. But the next song, the next slide and audio that we're going to play is Rhiannon in Full, which is the third track of the session, and it's introduced by Christine as a Stevie Nicks song. And I can only imagine as a young songwriter having that be your song featured, right? And having Christine McVie announce, like, this is your song, and they play it. And it's one of my favorite versions of this song, so we're going to listen to it together. I love that version so much. It's punchy. Eddie and I were just saying it's fast, right? The whole set, I think, in a lot of ways. And if we move to the next slide, the set list slide, I annotated
one
it.
One thing about that particular cut, though,
yeah.
I mean, it is so different than the polished version that you might hear, and it also really defined. That was the moment of change,
right?
In their sound.
You could hear struggle a little bit. Like, you could hear some of the harmonies aren't quite what we would expect, which I love about it. She's blowing out her voice a little bit, which I love about it. The keys are just like do-do-do-do-do
right.
Keys, right? They just tinkle. It's great. Everything's great. Comments on, and behind you while you're talking about this, I annotated what, surprisingly, you had said you expected them to play everything from the White Album generally, but actually they do a wide range. And there's also
a lot
like
of
a kind
older
of a
stuff on there
movement to the
too,
set.
yeah.
Like in the beginning, they're getting their footing. It's formally introduced, and then they just motor. Like it just feels like they hit the gas after Rhiannon, and it's like, boom. And I'd love to hear what it felt like as they were picking up that momentum in the room and what was happening, what you were hearing or seeing, and other people might have been saying.
Well, for me, the one thing I noticed is that as the time went on, they got more comfortable, which is when any band is first playing in a new venue or starting a new show, it's always the first number or two can be a little shaky. And I think they got much more comfortable as the time went. I could hear that very much. So it was, it turned into a really, I mean, just a magical show.
Yeah, you could hear it in the audio. Do you remember, Bruce?
I was there. And the very first song, their opener, was a song from when Christine was with a much older group. It was called Chicken Shack. And she got not talked into, it was her decision. She and John McVie, they got married, and she didn't want to be apart from him. So she left Chicken Shack so that if Fleetwood Mac was going to be touring, they'd be together. So that was the opening song.
I can't remember.
It's called I had to write this stuff down. Get Like You Used to Be. Get Like You Used to Be. Which is a great number. You should really hear it. It's wonderful. And that loosened them up. Station Man was a little bit, had a little different tempo to it, gave them a little bit more chance to kind of get with themselves. But after that, I mean, you could feel the adrenaline in this room. Imagine, I can put you guys right in that situation. Take this stage away and put the band, we're all on the floor, same level, and you're this close to the band. This is what it was like. No chairs. We sat on the floor. It was like a scout thing with like sit-upons or something like that, you know. But there was a shared adrenaline. The band was working off theirs and just getting into their groove, and everybody that was there wanted to be there. And I had never been in a studio when a band like that had played before. This is the first time for me too. And the audience just picked up on everything that the band was doing. And it was a complete shared experience. It was, I can't really compare it to too many other things. It was really wonderful.
And what was up with the bongo solo? I remember you telling a story about him taking the drum out at a certain point. Nick had come out with the drum. Maybe Dick told me that story about the bongo solo, which happens like way later in the night. And Lindsay's apologizing, like, hey, thanks for sticking around. It's 11 o'clock. Like, they've gone on. And then he takes a drum out and goes, I don't know, very long. It seems like 10 minutes, but it could be just wailing away on a bongo. At that point, it had to be pretty late in the night, too.
I missed that part because I was on the air at 10 o'clock. So I had to leave early. But
by that point, there was nothing that the band could do wrong. I mean, even if they had to tune a string or like take an extra moment to do something, we were, as the audience, we were in complete rapture, just watching them, watching everything. This is how it happens. And so that's what made it. There was nothing they could do wrong. Yeah. It was all wonderful to watch, everything.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, one of the differences is that when you go into the studio to make an album, you can do 20 sessions, whatever it takes. You listen to it, you make a change. There's all kinds of post-production, fine-tuning. This was live, and also they knew it was going to be on the air in 4 or 5 days. And that, I don't know, 300,000-400,000 people were going to hear it, whatever it might be. Because we were getting into New York, all of Long Island. It wasn't like, hey, we're in New Haven, but you can't hear it because you're in Milford. I mean, we had a very, very large audience. But they, I think, took the opportunity to really feel different things out. And even though they went from song to song to song, they were fooling around which the bongos was an example of that, you know? And so, to me, and this was probably about the 15th or 16th recording we had done in terms of different groups. Most of the groups would come in, like Steppenwolf came in, and there was nobody nicer in the world than John Kay. Unbelievable person. He set up, and he talked to the audience. He, had fun with them. Then all of a sudden, when they wanted to play, they just ripped right through it. It was like a show. This was not like they were doing a show. They were trying to figure things out in front of 100 people who were half loaded because I had to buy beer because we had to start late. But that's another story.
Right. So I think we have a great audio example of that. After they played Rhiannon, they play Why, which before we cue it, I wanted to mention I'm trying to be equitable, and I'm doing a Stevie song, a Christine song, and then a Lindsay song, even though I have personal issue with Lindsay, but I think his songs are great. But the next song that they play after Rhiannon is Why, and that we had just mentioned was sort of how things started to pick up, and you can also hear, it's like that riding a bike thing where they're getting the harmonies. They're not getting the harmonies. It's awesome behind the scenes. So it feels like what you might have experienced is that rawness of actually being close up with the band and knowing like this is what really happens, right, as they prepare. So the next slide is Why. My mic's off. Oh, I need tissues. Whenever I hear them harmonize, I get the tears thing. Right? The tears thing, or like the ASMR tingle thing, the Fleetwood Mac tingles. The next few slides, just to give you a sense of, and I'd love to hear some more. I know, Bruce, you had some notes and things. We have some time to just talk about a bit more of the session or anecdotal stories. I want to show you the next slide as well, so we could see inside of the session. Those drums were loud. I'm under the impression those are partitions around the outside of those drums, but they're still very loud. So he's, a very powerful drummer. The bass line walks, right? There's just so many little pockets of things that you could hear in the recording that create the magic is coming, right? Historically, down the road, this is going to synergize into this amazing thing.
But it's still, that song still has a lot more of the throwback of who they were, as opposed to the stronger Buckingham Nicks presence that you had in the other ones. And they were balancing. They were trying, they were trying to find exactly what the right balance was. And it's interesting to watch them perform and find that balance while at the same time they were trying to figure out if they hated each other. But that said, they toured as late as 2018, so you can't take that away from them.
What that show really was about, I think after maybe a few days, a week, a couple of weeks of just thinking about it, especially if you'd been there, was that as an audience we were treated to a little history of Fleetwood Mac up to that point. They had played a couple of songs from reaching way back into their catalog from their different iterations and brought it forward. And still among the 13 songs that they played, 6 of them were all from the new White record. But what you got with the other ones was a great little history.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, while you're talking, I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. Go ahead, Eddie, just so you can see more from that session.
Well, they did play a very good assortment from their history. You know, they were several different bands. And it was really, as Bruce said and Dick said, you know, imagine being on the floor, literally 10 feet away from this band. And I felt, you know, I had, as I said earlier, recently joined the station. And as a still kid in my early 20s and being part of just the most amazing station in the country. And, you know, it was all organic. Everybody, it was a sandbox. We all did what we wanted, and it was pretty much okay. And technologically, this was a new thing as far as doing a radio concert. The only one that I could think of before this that went out live was 11/17/70, the Elton John show on WABC FM, which eventually became WPLJ. But yeah, I mean, there was just so much going on. The history of it, the new technology for the time of it, all of it, it really was extremely memorable.
Do you want to describe that a little bit, the technology, the way that it was broadcast or recorded, anything that you wanted to add that way?
Well, what we did is, once I got a confirmation from the record company, because they paid to bring in the group. They wanted this promotion for the group. And I always found that if you never asked for something, you never got it. You can always get a no, but you'll never get a yes if you don't ask the question. So I would ask them all the time, you know, what can we do here? And yes, I'll get some of this on the air. I know nobody wants to play it, but we're going to work with you. And so we had these great partnerships. And so as this series grew, they saw that it was an opportunity for them to really get live recordings of groups, not in a concert setting, that they could really listen to, critique, work with them on, and at the same time, they had rights from the standpoint of, you know, I'm not sure what they would do with them because we owned the rights to broadcast them. But they liked the fact that they could use these studio experiences, these studio promotions. This was a promotion for them. And it worked out really well for us. I mean, it really did. We broadcast them on Sunday nights. People really anticipated it. We had TV ratings on Sunday nights for this stuff. And if I could do it again, I would. It just was just the most wonderful experience. And we did it over about 2 years. One quick thing. Orleans was here, about 3, 4, no, it was maybe more, about 5 or 6 years ago, and they played Levitt. So I came to the sound check, And I walked up to John Hall and I said, I'm Dick Kalt, WPLR. Oh, hey, you remember when you were at Trod Nossel? He said, oh, are you kidding? That was really wonderful. And we talked for about 10 minutes just about that one session. Forget the fact that they became who they became and ABC took their music and used it and all that stuff. He was telling me things about that session that I couldn't believe he remembered. And that was back then, 40 years ago. And I think that's what it meant to the groups. And it was worth it.
Which is a great opportunity to play you another track. Then should be the next slide where we have Stevie in headphones. I also find that, what's with the high watt rig? And everyone's wearing headphones. It had to be loud. The next slide and the next track we're gonna hear is I'm So Afraid, and they're really kind of picking up steam at this point in the evening, so let's take a listen to that. I just wanted to hang on for I love when Lindsay ramps. He does like the Captain Caveman sound. It's so much fun. Go ahead, yeah.
No, they were in their groove by then. You can hear the difference. They slowed things down. They, vocally, they just really started to play off each other. And they stopped thinking about what they were doing and they just did it. So you could hear that.
Well, they were trying to really make a statement.
Yeah.
And it was such an uplifting song. But still, but this was Lindsay's work. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Bruce, did you want to add anything?
A lot of these songs, by the way, I'm So Afraid, and even Rhiannon, these were songs that Lindsay and Stevie had written, I'm going to say a good number of years. We're talking about maybe at that point, 6 or 7 years before they had shown up with Fleetwood Mac at the start of 1975. So they brought great material into the band, and this was one of the songs. It was a great piece of music.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And before we jump into Q&A, there's a really important story that I want to kind of prompt Dick to tell us about, which is, so now we've gone kind of through the arc of the session, and it's after, right? The after story, what happens next? How do you come down from that? And what happened for you at the end following the session?
So I've got the tapes, and everybody's talking, and they're leaving, and everything, and Mick comes up to me, he says, okay, give me the tapes. I said, what? He said, yeah, I want the tapes. I said, well, they're my tapes. They're not your tapes. Now, of course, I'm thinking to myself, it is his product. He said, no, I gotta take the tapes. I said, and what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going to take a listen to them, and I'm going to mix them. And the first thing that came to my mind is, well, he's a drummer. Okay. Then I realized, look, and then finally he said, I take the tapes or you don't broadcast. And I figured, well, I don't want to get into all of that. So I gave him the tapes. I said, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Miami. I said, Miami? He said, yeah, we're leaving tomorrow morning, but we're going to be at Criterion Studios, and I'll mix it down, and I'll get it back to you. I said, we're going on the air in 5 days. Can you get it back to me? He says, oh, yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. So, of course, now it's Friday. We're going on the air on Sunday. We're promoting the shit out of this thing, and he calls me. He says, oh, I'm sorry, just haven't gotten to it yet. Well, okay, this is not a good thing. He said, well, what can I tell you? I said, okay, I'm going to postpone it for a week. But if I don't get the tapes next week, then we're going to have to talk. So sure enough, next Wednesday or so, he calls me at home and he says, okay, I've sent them out. You'll have them tomorrow. And I got them.
Before we jump into Q&A, I just want to open it up to any other comments or anecdotes or thoughts you'd like to add before we give it to the audience to ask you questions. Good? We're good.
No, I think we're good.
We're ready for folks who might want to ask
If anyone has any questions, please come over to this microphone so everyone can hear.
Hi, thanks for doing this. So my first Fleetwood Mac show was 6 months later at Three Rivers Stadium. And I was looking at that set list and this set list, and they added a song and removed one. So they added Say You Love Me to start, opening up the show. And then they also added Monday Morning. And they removed, I guess, Green Malishi? I forget. Yeah, that one. They removed that one. So, but that was a great show. It was Boss Skaggs, Fleetwood Mac, and the Eagles in Three River Stadium. And so that's a good show. Actually, what happened is they didn't serve beer and allow it in because a month before there was some crazy melee that occurred, and people were all cut up, and 250 people were hurt. They fired the doctor and stuff. So this was the show that we saw, which was a dry show. My question is, have you seen Daisy Jones and the Six? And the TV show that they created that's essentially based on Fleetwood Mac, and if you thought that it was a reasonable recreation of how the band transitioned from blues to more of this rock band that became the phenomenon that they were.
Have you seen it? We're going to have another panel about that, and everyone's going to go home and watch it?
Okay, that was my question.
No, it's a great question. I didn't even know about the show.
Yeah,
I hadn't heard of it.
I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it. I'm going to have to look for it, though.
It's very well done, and it basically recreates what the feeling is of how you took a band that was not quite working well and brought in a female singer, and moving forward, and it's essentially based off of the transition that occurred with Fleetwood Mac.
Where would you see that? Amazon, Netflix, who has it? Amazon? Excellent. Okay.
Elvis's granddaughter is the lead.
Oh, cool.
Oh, we'll definitely check this out. Yeah.
All right.
Future panel. We're going to do it.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question about the gear, actually. I couldn't help but notice on Rhiannon, Christy McVie's playing a slightly different keyboard part than normally on that song. As time went on, she leaned heavier into and the rock band sound got bigger. She leaned into the B3 and started adding synths. And I know that she played a Yamaha CP, but it sounds like a Wurlitzer on the recording, and I was curious if they had anything backlined when they came into the session or if they brought all of their own gear.
No.
It's a B3 according to
Yeah.
Rick Roberts.
But not the piano sound is particularly what I'm asking about.
No, there was some gear in the studio anyway, because they were constantly producing, regardless of when we brought people in. But they brought most of their stuff. But she did make a few changes. You're right, on different songs. But I can't give you a more firm answer.
You don't happen to know if there was a piano in the studio already when she walked in?
Yeah, I think there was a baby
Oh yeah, there
grand
was
in
a
there.
piano in the studio. Yeah.
Okay, curious. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We also have some photographs that I could share with you that show images of the actual keys that she's playing. I hadn't even thought of that, but I'm sure there's personnel notes. You can go deep diving on this session, and there may be instrument notes.
Yeah, I'll save my nerd time for me. But
Yeah.
like but it was interesting. You guys noted that they played the song a little bit fast. The whole session seemed to be a little bit hyped up, a little bit more rock and roll.
Yeah.
And as they became a bigger sounding band, she leaned a little bit more into the ethereal sounds. But the piano, she's just killing it on there, and it sounds to me like a Wurlitzer, which she was not known for. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Hi, this is all super fascinating. Thanks for doing this. I have a question somewhat along the same lines, but in seeing all the photos, all the headphones and the partitions and things, obviously very different from a live concert situation. Was that something you did for all the groups? Was that something that was unusual for like Fleetwood Mac or others to adjust to? Like, I'm just curious. I assume that was because there was no stage monitors, but like, can you talk a little about that?
I think what we wanted to give the small audience that was there, we wanted to give them something like they'd never seen before, which is, this is what you do in a studio. This is what happens. Very different from standing on a stage. So having the partitions and all that kind of stuff, it made it more real for the audience. Really got a real education and a real treat out of the whole thing.
Yeah, the partitions are fairly common in studios, basically, to absorb the ambient sound, the reverb off the walls. So, especially around drum kits. You'll see even in concerts now, that drummers are usually enclosed in plexiglass, so you can basically mitigate the sound. You can really adjust it.
When I put the program together with the record companies, I said to them, how you use it is up to you. Because again, my goal was an experience for the audience that was still going to be broadcast worthy. But it didn't matter to me if they were experimenting, even if they were doing second or third takes. And there were some sessions where we did that as well. It was meant to be something you couldn't buy a ticket for.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for doing this. You really, the presentation and this incredible audio-video setup is making it feel like we were there. So thank you for giving us that. A question, you talked a lot about how the fact that the group, this was the 9th incarnation, I think you said, that they had had some success before. They had some minor hits, they were playing clubs, et cetera, et cetera. But Lindsay and Stevie were new, and I assume they had their own incarnation but hadn't achieved any real success before joining Fleetwood Mac. At the show, did you get a sense, this must have been one of the, like you said, the first times that Lindsay and Stevie were playing in front of a sizable crowd or recording for a big audience. Did you get a sense that there was a difference in the confidence level, the performance level between those who had done it before, Mick and Christine and John, versus how Lindsay and Stevie were now responding to a bigger podium?
Boy, I'll tell you something about that. That's a very good question. Lindsay and Stevie, how many people in this audience remember the album Buckingham Nicks? Okay, just about everybody. Great. The album didn't really sell that well to begin with, and I think that came out in '71 or '72, something like that. The point is that Lindsay and Stevie were used to giving a polished presentation. They worked after it. So when they showed up with Fleetwood Mac, I think they were really ready to step in. I mean, there were some human adjustments that had to be made, of course, but I think professionally as musicians, they were ready to step right in. I think so.
Wasn't the old spicy rumor that she would wait tables while he practiced guitar? That was a thing that I read about. Her resentment in the long run was like he wouldn't have been as good of a performer or a guitar player if she didn't pay for him to not work. Side note. That was during Buckingham Nicks. What about during the session? Was there any, even at dinner, like divisions, like were they together apart, or did it seem different on stage with them, or did they just seamlessly kind of blend right in, I guess? The question.
Well, they were, even well after the session, for a couple of years, they were working very hard to get more of their material integrated into these albums. I mean, there were albums that they were going to release where there wasn't even a Buckingham Nicks presence, even if she was singing vocals. And that was going back and forth for quite a long time. That particular day, I know that Lindsay was a bit uptight because here he is in a studio, and he's got a chance to really have some fun and really experiment a little bit, because this guy is in a different league with a lot of with the other members of the group as a writer-producer. Mick and John, good musicians, and they like to perform, but they weren't, quintessential writer, producer, musicians, and he was. And at the same time, he and Stevie are kind of sort of like not a couple anymore. So when we got together and we had a chance to do a lot of small talking, I spent most of my time talking to Christine. I mean, she was very comfortable, and she bonded right away with Stevie, because here you are in a group which is basically male-dominated, and she saw somebody that she could really relate to, and they did. They had a very good relationship, and they spoke together a lot during the dinner. But you could, you could tell that they weren't quite a family, if you will. Not at that point. And it took a while, and then it would blow up, and then they'd come back, and they would blow up again. It was a very, very unusual for them to have lasted. They have to be very special to be this special for so long. It really is incredible.
Yeah, the dynamic in rock bands is difficult because there's always somebody who rises to be the face of the band. There's very few bands that you could think of that everybody is considered an equal. Maybe the Grateful Dead back when, bands like that, but there's resentments that develop over time. The power dynamic shifts. Stevie Nicks became pretty much the face of the band over time, and that gets difficult, and then the relationships change, and being that close to everybody for so many days, it's like at the end of the day when people are at work in a normal situation, they go home at the end of the day, they can be separate. Not so much in a band, especially when you're on the road. I mean, we've had occasions in the past of bands that would come through, and remember Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Emerson, Lake and Palmer came through New Haven back in 1977, I think it was, and they hated each other. They would not have anything to do with each other at that point.
I'll tell you how bad that was.
I went to that dinner.
You want it? Emerson, Lake and Palmer played the New Haven Coliseum. New Haven Coliseum to the Park Plaza Hotel back then was like from here to that stairway, okay? So they're staying at the Park Plaza, and Jimmy Koplik and I were over the Coliseum, and I said, when are they coming over? He says, listen, I just sent 3 stretches over for them. I said, 3 stretches? He said, yeah. I said, okay, I'm not even going to ask. Sure enough, 3 stretches pull up, 1 in each. Why? They won't ride in the same God-blessed car. You could have rolled over from the hotel to the Coliseum, not even walked, and we had to get 3 stretches. Then they get on stage, whole different thing. Get off stage, see you later, bye. That's how it worked in some of these cases, And
we went to dinner with them that evening with the record company, and
Yes.
and dinner was set up as 3 separate tables. And luckily, I earlier in the day, I had interviewed Greg Lake. He came up to the studio, and I don't know why, because all he did was give me one-word answers. He didn't seem to want to be there. So at dinner, I sat with Carl Palmer, who was a really, good guy, But the other 2 had their issues. And I guess they all had their issues together.
Well, I mean, they did their own thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's great soap opera.
But
Great family entertainment.
Yeah, that's the dynamic, though, of rock and roll,
We could do a whole panel someday on contract writers. But we're not going to because we don't want to get arrested.
It's also great songwriting fodder because then we get songs like The Chain, right, as a result of this band drama.